The Holy See is one of the biggest religions in the history of Berserk. It has by far the biggest influence on the series' politics and narrative, and several of our main cast members have been part of its sphere of influence as well. Farnace, Serpico, Azan, and even Guts to an extent, they've all felt the wings of the Sea's god brush against their faces at one point or another. And, of course, the person most closely associated with the Sea is none other than our series' antagonist, Griffith. So that got us thinking, what exactly is the Holy See? How did it come into existence? What is its history like? And why in the world is it so important? Well, we'll be attempting to answer all of those questions and more in this video, so without further ado, let's dive straight into it.
A religion born from reactions. How the Holy See came to be. If you guys haven't made the connection yet, and we don't know why you wouldn't since the link is like right in our faces, the Holy See is Berserk's take on the Catholic Church. Literally everything about it screams Catholicism, from its name to its practices and even its punishments. Its punishments especially, actually. The name is a direct reference to the See of Rome, which is the official center of the Catholic world based out of Vatican City and is also called the Holy See. The city of Ratanus is basically Berserk's Vatican City because it's called the Holy City of Ratanus and has a harbor and the most powerful bank in the Western world. Berserk's Holy See has a pope, just how real-world Catholics have a pope, and, most of all, the adherents of the Holy See do many of the things that Catholics do. They have communion, they offer prostration, they probably also eat bread and drink wine, but perhaps not for the exact same reason. Because the one big difference between the See from Berserk and the See of Rome is that the former doesn't have a Jesus figure that's venerated in its scriptures. In fact, we've never even seen the Bible of Berserk, and the only thing we know about its scripture is that it promotes torture as a means of punishment and penance in the eyes of God. That's what Father Mozgus says in the initial stages of the Conviction arc, and we're going to take his word for it because he might be a crazy inquisitor, but he's also very thorough with his understanding of his faith. Pain and penance are the two pillars upon which the Holy See was built, and interestingly enough, we also get a sliver of its origin story from Mozgus as well. In chapter 138, Mozgus tells a story we've recounted several times on this channel, so we'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. 1,000 years ago, Supreme King Gaiseric imprisoned a certain sage within the Tower of Conviction and tortured him in every way imaginable for the crime of speaking out against his excesses and sins. But the sage didn't give up. Instead, he proclaimed Gaiseric's sins to God daily until an angel descended. This story lines up with the story of the vanishing of Gaiseric's capital city and the destruction of his empire, because that story also has angels descending from heaven and delivering God's justice to the evil Skull King. But the part that matters when it comes to this video is the fact that in Mozgus's version of the tale, he says God. Singular. In fact, the fairy tales about Gaiseric's empire also use the word God in singular terms, which is kind of odd, considering the fact that Berserk used to be a world with many gods back in that day and age. For instance, the sea god from the Fantasia arc is an ancient deity that most likely predates the arrival of the Holy See. That's why when we reach Yzma's Island, instead of seeing a church on its rocky landscape, we see ancient shrines dedicated to the sea god. Yzma's Island is also quite an isolated location, so it makes sense that the influence of the Holy See didn't reach it, and it continued worshipping a deity from the old days. Throughout the series, we also see various nature spirits whose powers basically make them gods or demigods at the very least. The Lady of Waves from Enoch Village is like an ancient river sprite, the Wheel of Flames from Ratanus is a Mars-like entity, the Rotting Root Lord is basically Swamp Thing with decay, and each of them have powers that feel divine, despite the fact that they're probably just using magic to achieve their goals on an unfathomable scale. This suggests that polytheism was a thing in Berserk's past, and one of our main characters says as much, which we'll get to in the next segment. So why in the world is the Holy See so focused on a single deity? Well, if we look at what the rise of Christianity did in our world and overlay it with the events that transpire in the Berserkverse, we get an idea of what might have happened. In our world, the rise of Christianity coincided with the decline of other polytheist religions and schools of spirituality. Why did that happen? Well, the answer is simple. Those other religions were considered heretical in the eyes of devout Christians. It's an age-old formula, after all. If you want to ensure that your side wins the battle and is remembered throughout eternity, you don't just defeat the other guy, you erase them from existence. Christians the world over smashed temples and effigies for all kinds of local and regional gods and goddesses to make way for the cross and the image of the Redeemer. Churches replaced old rock idols, and the light of a single god was hailed as being more illuminating than the shared luminescence of entire pantheons of gods and deities. This happens in Berserk as well, because most of this universe's churches are built upon altars that were formerly dedicated to nature spirits and the like. We see this firsthand in the Millennium Falcon arc, where Shirke locates the Lady of the Waves shrine underneath the Enoch Village Church. Real-world Christians did what they did because they believed in the Abrahamic school of religion. These teachings propose that there's one God who's mostly imperceptible, all-knowing, and all-powerful. He alone has dominion over the universe, and he is the one responsible for humanity's creation. In Berserk, we imagine it's the same thing when it comes to the perception of God, with a couple of critical changes. For one thing, the Berserk cross isn't adorned with the bleeding body of Jesus Christ, it's adorned with the body of a white falcon that has its wings spread apart. And another thing, we've actually seen the God that most likely created the Holy See, and he isn't a benevolent being by any measure of that term. You see, much like Christianity, which was born as a reaction to the oppressive rule of the Romans in the Middle East, Berserk's Holy See too was born as a reaction. It was a rejection of the previous way of living life, which involved communion with nature and nature spirits to achieve spiritual enlightenment. Doing what Shirke does in the main series was quite common back in the day, but then one man used those powers to subjugate the world, and that man, as you might have guessed, was Supreme King Geiserik. Go watch our videos on his conquest of the world to get a better idea as to why he was the reason magic got stomped out of existence, but if we have to put it in the simplest terms, Geiserik used the power of Arcana, like the Berserker armor and the mages of Elfhelm, to accomplish his life's goals. Then, he started a tyrannical regime, which ended up taking the lives of many people just for the construction of his capital city. So it only makes sense that those dissatisfied with his rule would create an entire movement dedicated to burying the aspects that enabled his rule. Chief among those aspects was magic, and so the Holy See, being an organization that opposes magic, makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. And it will make even more sense when we touch upon the true reason it exists, which was revealed to us in the only chapter deleted from Berserk's continuity, Chapter 83. The Gateway for the Godhand. The reason Griffith is the Holy See's Messiah. In Chapter 83, Griffith meets the only god that's ever been confirmed to exist in the Berserkverse, and that is the idea of evil. This astral entity exists within the depths of the abyss, the deepest layer of the astral world, and to hear it tell its own story, it came into existence because humans desired reasons. Reasons to love, reasons to hate, reasons to exist and die. Human suffering and pain is what gave the idea of evil form, and when Griffith finally meets it, he has the closest thing to a spiritual awakening. He learns that his entire life had been planned out long before his birth, including the bloodlines that gave birth to him and the context within which he lived his life. The Holy See wasn't a major focus of the story at that point, but it was clear to us that religion was included in the idea of evil's explanation of its own existence, and that only became more clear as the series progressed. We've often wondered why Griffith became a figurehead for the Holy See after his incarnation into the physical world, but then we realized that we already knew the answer. It's because he's been positioned as the Jesus figure of Berserk, and the Holy See is the vehicle through which he'll spread his gospel. Let's align the rise of the See with the increase in the Godhand's influence on the world, shall we? The Holy See is a body that seeks to eliminate all resistance to its own beliefs, which are rooted in penance through pain. The fact that there's an entire torture chamber in the Tower of Conviction tells us that inflicting pain and punishment onto people is one of the Sea's core tenets, and who does that remind you of, specifically from the Godhand? That's right, we're talking about Void, and the fact that he seems to have been heavily involved with the creation and dissemination of the Holy Sea's core tenets. For starters, that story Father Mozgus tells in Chapter 138 is given to us as justification of the Sea's extreme acts. This implies that it was founded based on those acts as well, and why would a man of the cloth refer to Void as a sage if he wasn't connected to his religion? The See is notoriously hateful towards anything that isn't part of their holy books, So their most infamous inquisitor of all people talking about some pagan sage wouldn't make sense unless he was a part of the Sea's history. Moreover, if we look at the Sea's actions up until the beginning of Berserk and then look at what Griffith does post-incarnation, there's a weird sort of synergy that emerges. One of the first things that the Holy See did after it was established was going on these massive heretic inquisitions that captured, killed, or isolated every practitioner of magic in this world. We know this because Princess Charlotte herself tells us that after the fall of Geiseric's capital and empire, there was an inquisition which led to the creation of the Tower of Rebirth, and Midland is part of the Sea's territories. Churches dampening the powers of spirits for no reason other than the promotion of the church would make sense by itself, but when you think of it as a means of weakening all other astral influences, save the Godhands, then the agenda becomes crystal clear. One of the first things Griffith does after regaining a body of flesh is to take out every single witch, wizard, and spirit tree he can get his hands on, because he knows that as long as those pockets of spiritual calmness still exist within the world, he won't be able to control it through chaos. On top of that, we know that the magic of elves has a canceling effect on the curses of the Godhand, and it's quite possible that when used at maximum capacity, the same magic can actually remove the influence of evil entirely. Casca lived in the elf cave near Godot's hut for 2 years, and she was never attacked by dead spirits or possessed corpses the way Guts is each and every night. Heck, when the Black Swordsman party reaches Flora's mansion, she applies a talisman to both Guts and Casca's brand of sacrifice that dampens their effects for 3 days. And she states that she regrets she didn't have enough power to remove them entirely. The fact is that evil can be countered in this world, especially by those who harness good magic and have good intentions. But that's also the primary reason that the Holy See, and later Griffith, ramp up their attacks on all sorts of practitioners of the arcane arts, because they know that as long as even one of them is left alive, it could ruin their entire plan of taking over creation itself. So the reason churches were built upon former spiritual grounds is actually quite simple. They're power dampeners, and the heretic inquisitions were a means to remove all those elements from human society that could channel spiritual power and oppose the Godhand's plan. Now, let's get back to the point about pain and penance for a minute, because torturing people as homage to Void is hardcore, but it isn't the only reason it's done. You know what happens to the souls of those who die unjust deaths in the world of Berserk? That's right. They turn into malign beings who continue to exist in the physical world because they died unjust deaths. Such souls end up becoming damned. And you know where the souls of the damned end up in Berserk? Right again, they end up in the abyss. By torturing people to death, the Holy See is inadvertently helping out the Godhand's agenda of spreading fear and evil throughout the world, because those dead souls don't just haunt people, they possess them, turn their darkest thoughts into reality, and feed off their flesh until nothing remains but the deep black darkness. Dead souls are one of the main proponents of the incarnation ceremony, because what happened when the egg of the perfect world triggered that event? Several of the refugees in the camp of St. Albion were possessed by dead spirits and turned into murderers, cannibals, and worse. Those who consumed the flesh of their fellow man were consumed in turn by the massive blobs of blood that emerged from the ground surrounding the Tower of Conviction. And those blobs themselves are quite possibly the remnants of those who became casualties of the first eclipse. Skull Knight once said of them that they were the foundational ancestors of a place, and judging by the pace at which they devour flesh, we have to assume that said ancestors were somehow related to either one of or the entire Godhand. And this assumption feels even more concrete when we take into account what Griffith is doing at the moment with the Holy See. Even before his incarnation, the former White Falcon used Holy See imagery to herald his return, because as we mentioned earlier, that context has been laid out by the idea of evil for him to use when the time was right. It always puzzled us that the religious symbol of such a restrictive religion was something as liberating and freeing as a falcon in flight. The soaring of a bird is understood to be the ultimate symbol of independence. Humans long for flight because they want to be free of their bondage to the land, where they have to use their stupid feet to traverse the world. But there is a darker aspect to this as well, because flying means the flyer constantly looks down on the world beneath them, and it's that aspect that informed Griffith's true form as a Godhand. After hearing the idea of evil's explanation for its own existence and for Griffith's existence, the White Falcon submits to his god and asks it what it expects of him. The idea tells him that all he needs to do is what he has always wanted to do: because their wills are one and the same. Griffith then asks for wings, because not only does he want to dominate every person from his past, present, and future, he also needs them to accomplish his dream. After realizing that the falcon imagery was planted into the Holy See for his perusal, Griffith returns to the world, embracing his role as a falcon a lot more openly. Previously, it was his command epithet, the name he used to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. Now, it's become his identity, especially since he's projecting himself as the leader of all humanity for the foreseeable future. Usually, the four horsemen of death are associated with the apocalypse. Their arrival signals the end of the world, and it does the same in Berserk, but there's a slight difference between the two. In the latter, the four horsemen, or rather their equivalents, are unleashed upon the world to drive it closer to the Godhand's influence, instead of creating a narrative where a Messiah can finally arrive and reconcile the differences that plague the world. Griffith's Jesus status is entirely false, because he has no intention of saving the world. In fact, he's intent on destroying it and remaking it in his own image, one which is riddled with the scent of evil. In chapter 95, we hear of the prophecy of the falcon, which is one of the only things that the Holy See scriptures get right about the world. This prophecy states that the fifth eclipse will signal the alighting of the fifth angel, and when that angel emerges, the humans and inhumans of planet Earth will follow him blindly, and that he will lead them into an age of darkness. Because that chapter comes to us from the perspective of do-gooders like Azan, Serpico, and to an extent Farnace, we tend to look at it as a warning. But what if it's not a warning, but a miracle that the originators of the sea wanted to fulfill? That's quite possible, considering the fact that they thought death, torture, and chaos were acceptable pillars for a society, and in fact, Farnace and her Holy Iron Chain Knights were sent out by the Miracle Recognition Department of the Holy See to confirm whether the Red Lake from the prophecy of the Falcon had appeared or not. That name, the Miracle Recognition Department, is an ancient one, and suggests that the founders of this movement wanted the Age of Darkness to descend upon the world. 1,000 years of interpretation and reinterpretation have made the current adherents of the sea look at it as a warning, and we're glad that change has occurred, because can you imagine pre-Enlightenment Farnace meeting Griffith? She'd have ditched the world to be with him, and he would have amplified all the darkness within her heart, making them the perfect couple to rule over the apocalypse. This brings us to the oracular dreams that got Griffith his current post as well, because as unrelated as they might seem, it's clear that he and his Godhand buddies were using their status as metaphysical beings to guide humanity into his wings. The first dream showed the world in the clutches of death, and then death itself was cleaved in half by the shining wings of the Falcon of Light. This same Falcon is then seen in many other dreams that specifically aim to increase Griffith's support base as he positions himself as the Messiah and the rightful king of the world. He even sends a dream to the current Pope of the Sea to get him on his side and officially endorse him as the savior of the world, because Griffith's goal is quite simple. He wants everyone and everything to become one, and when he says one, he means one with the abyss and one with the God he serves. The idea of evil being the unseen God of the Holy See makes complete sense based on everything we've laid out in this video, because it explains the sins that the church propagates better than any other theory we've ever heard of. Since the idea exists solely in the astral world, it needed an agent in the physical world that had enough of its power to begin the merger between the worlds. Only this time on the side of evil. What happens immediately after Griffith is incarnated? Well, Guts and friends encounter Kliphoff near Enoch Village, and then a demonic emperor takes over Wyndham and sends his demon army to wipe out Berserk's Vatican, which is then saved by Berserk's Messiah. The creation of Fantasia itself is one of the worst things that could have happened, because it coincides with the destruction of most of the world's spirit trees. Those trees were keeping the world spiral tree tethered to the garden of spirit trees in the astral world and blocking the influence of evil from spilling into human society. Now that they're all gone, there's nothing stopping Griffith from harvesting the souls of those who have fallen, especially in his service, and feeding them to the abyss, which is something he's been doing for some time. One God, one world. That's the message of the Holy See, and that's exactly the direction that Griffith's involvement with them has pushed its adherents towards. Will the Holy See survive Berserk? What will happen to this religion in the end? For 1,000 years, the Holy See has had its oppressive iron grip on at least the western hemisphere of the Berserkverse. It's enabled madmen like Mozgus and given free rein to confused individuals like Farnace to upend the social order so long as it serves the sea. Now, it's been commandeered by a man who's posing as the son of God, only in the Berserkverse, and all of the sea's commandments are being perverted by Griffith and his war demons. But a day will come when the people will see for themselves that they're part of the Age of Darkness, not an age of enlightenment and wonders. And when that happens, belief in the Holy See will shatter. People will realize that the salvation they prayed for, they dreamed about, was nothing more than a false promise. The Godhand's idea of salvation is to stick everyone in the vortex of souls and call it a day because they're human beings who have become Hell's heralds and they like it. It doesn't matter if the rest of the world doesn't because they've proven that they can use people despite never revealing their true intentions to them in the first place. However, when the day arrives when Griffith is forced to show his true form to his followers, and that day will come, considering the trajectory of the story, people adhering to the Sea's tenets will abandon those tenets and most likely return to a more spiritual way of life. That could be made possible by people like Shirke, Farnace, Daiba, and the rest of the Elfhelm contingent taking center stage in the rebuilding process, because at this point, we're pretty sure these people in particular are going to survive the coming final battle. Farnace and Roderick becoming the next king and queen of the world sounds like a much better deal than Griffith and Charlotte ruling over the same, because in that couple, one person is under the spell of the other. But even if a return to spiritualism doesn't end up happening, we think that the Holy See itself will disintegrate, and in its place, a new religion will emerge, the religion of those who follow the same path as Guts. Guts has often been positioned as a man who didn't ask for responsibility, yet excels at wielding it, especially when the occasion calls for it. His vigor and determination inspired someone as fanatical as Farnace to renounce her religion, and for a while she was hunting him, thinking he was the Falcon of Darkness and not Griffith. In many ways, Guts is the true Falcon of Light because he's fighting for what's right, and yes, he's taken many detours on his journey into the darkness, but more often than not, Guts finds his way back to his own path. His philosophy, that making personal choices is what shapes one's destiny more than the hand of God, is what resonates with so many of the people around him, and that's why he could very well become the figurehead for a new religion that replaces the idols and the thought processes of the old world. But whether the people revert to spirituality or progress to a new form of religious worship, perhaps even no worship at all, is what we see for the future of Berserk, because once Griffith's manipulations of the Holy See are revealed, we doubt anyone would want to worship in front of that Falcon statue anymore. Many of the sites connected to the Holy See's origins are already in ruins. The Tower of Conviction, where it was born, was turned to dust by the Incarnation ceremony, and the Tower of Rebirth was destroyed shortly before Falconia was created. Once all the symbols and the presence of the sea itself are eradicated, a new way of life can be created by the survivors of this nightmare dressed up as a religion, and that's how you both build and destroy a movement by your own hands. Conclusion. Well, with that said, we hope we did justice to what y'all came here to see, because this is all we've got for you guys today. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content. We'll see you guys soon with yet another video, so until then, stay safe and remember to keep on struggling, strugglers.